Hello everyone, nice to meet you on this rainy morning on Henson Island at Orca Lab. I'm Paul Spong, and
I'm Helena Symonds.
And we're the co-directors of Orca Lab. We've been working together here since 1979, and we're delighted to have Explore join us as partners in this wonderful new endeavor where we're able to bring through the cameras what is happening here and in our local area live, and of course especially with orcas.
We've always felt that we live in a very special place, and now we're really happy that we're able to share it, and we're very excited about this.
Yes, absolutely. It's a dream come true for us, I have to say.
So I think we have some questions from the audience that we'll attempt to answer. Hope we do as good a job as Megan did the other day.
Yeah, that was great.
That was fun for us to watch. So the first question is, how many orcas are in the northern resident group, and how many pods does it consist of?
Well, Jared told us an exact number yesterday, pretty much, didn't he?
Did he? But it's around 285, and there are they're organized into 16 pods. Within those pods, there's smaller groups called matrilines, and there's 34 matrilines in the whole community, the northern resident community.
And the pods are kind of like extended families.
Yes, there may be one matriline or as many as 4 matrilines within a pod. Okay. And how do you tell residents apart from transients apart from residents? Are there distinct differences in a transient?
Well, to start off with, I think you have to say they have very different lifestyles. They look, at least in a superficial way, they look very similar to one another, but there are differences in their body. Transient, they're called Biggs orcas now, by the way, after Michael Bigg, who found and discriminated them from other orcas. In any event, they have, generally speaking, more pointed dorsal fins. The positioning of the saddle patch on the side of the body is a little bit different. And they have very, very different lifestyles and habits.
Yes, their cultures are totally different from each other, and the Biggs will hunt other marine mammals, whereas the northern residents eat salmon primarily. And yeah, I think it's true to say that the Biggs are the biggest of the North Pacific orcas. They range, they're a little bit bigger than the resident orcas.
The range is certainly different.
Oh, the range is very different. They can be found, they will range anywhere from California right up to Alaska, the same groups, whereas the resident orcas are more limited to this area around Vancouver Island and up into southeast Alaska.
Yeah, essentially the central coast of BC. If you think about halfway down Vancouver Island up to southeast Alaska, you pretty much cover the range that the residents are in. But the transients, the Biggs orcas, can range all the way from Alaska down to Southern California. And they're very, very mobile in that sense. However, there are also habits that they have, in particular family groups show up in this area, for example, more often than others. So I guess it's fair to say that the labels residents and transients are slightly off, but in a general sense they also give you some idea. The residents were named after the fact that they could most often be found in this area during the summertime. And the transients were named after the fact that they weren't seen so often, and they were seen at different times of the year. So it was kind of thought that they might be just passing through.
Paul, apparently our volume isn't very high. Can you adjust the volume, or should we speak a little bit louder?
We can speak louder if you can't hear us very well. We can also ask Momoko to come and adjust the volume on the mic.
Okay, we'll try to fix that, and in the meantime we'll talk a little bit louder until we get somebody who can come and adjust the volume.
Okay, so give us feedback, please.
In the meantime, there's another question. Have you found that global warming has had an effect on the orcas? Do you want to talk about that, or?
Well, I certainly can talk about global warming. It's probably the biggest problem that we face on this planet today, I would say. And it certainly affects the oceans, is affecting the oceans. It's affecting the rivers. Salmon, of course, depend on rivers, and as the rivers become warmer, I think the salmon are going to face increasing difficulties. Their ability to swim up rivers where they spawn is dependent on temperature, and there's only a small amount of temperature range that they can withstand. So I think that the salmon are going to be in increasing trouble as time passes and as the oceans warm and as the rivers warm, and that because orcas are the resident orcas are fish eating, they're going to find increased trouble in finding food. It's a big problem for them.
Right now, along the coast, it's maintaining a small, narrow band of cool waters. So at present, things are stable. But as Paul said, the concern is what happens to the salmon, and they're very, very sensitive to temperature changes. In the Gulf of Alaska, there is a huge area that is warming, and scientists have called it the Blob. And this is particularly scary because of what is going to happen to the ocean temperatures. We're just talking with a colleague the other day, and he said that blue whales have actually moved inshore inside their range, their normal range, and this may be that they're looking for colder waters. So in the future, there are going to be severe problems. Right now, it's okay.
Yeah, I think that one of the things about the ocean right now, I think, is that there's a fairly narrow band of cool water along the coast of British Columbia and further south, but that can change, and that's potentially a huge problem.
Are there laws in place now to prevent the capturing of orcas? Do you ever face the threat of poachers in your area?
Well, it's in general, I think it's true to say there are no laws. There are prohibitions in some areas. For example, in Washington State, I'm not sure if it's a law, but there's an absolute prohibition against capturing orcas. And it dates way back to the 1970s when so many orcas were in 60s when so many orcas were captured that it became recognized that the population was getting into severe danger. And as a result of a court case, SeaWorld, which was the main capturer of orcas, had to promise never to capture orcas again in Washington State. I think that in the background there's public opinion. And I think it would be very, very difficult for orcas to be captured in North America, or indeed in most places around the world at this point. There's one big exception to that, and that is Russia. In Russia, there have been numerous captures of orcas that have taken place over the last decade or so, and their numbers are increasing. I think right now there's a permit being issued by Russian authorities to capture 20 orcas in the area around Kamchatka in the Okhotsk Sea. This is a huge problem. This is being done in the context of very little knowledge about the population, very little certainty about what the impacts of captures are going to be on them, and a growing market, especially in China, for captive orcas. So it's a big problem. In North America and in Europe, I would say pretty much in most parts of the world, the problem has been resolved. However, it still exists, and it's really serious.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. We know what some of the effects of capturing orcas and taking them away from their pods. These are small groups. To extract individuals from it disrupts the whole chain of transmission of culture through the mother to the offspring, and we see the results. I think most people would agree now that the captures that happened in the 60s and 70s that affected the southern resident group, the area that live around the Puget Sound area of Seattle and Vancouver and Victoria, we know what the effect is. They are struggling. There's only just 80 plus individuals now, and for years they just have not seemed to be able to recover from the devastation of those captures. So to have it replicated in Russia is just a complete tragedy, and it is a very self-serving, selfish practice.
Yeah. I don't know how it can happen, but it has to stop.
And we can't stress that enough. A lot of the work that we do here at Orca Lab has been on education about the effects of captivity on orcas. It's really how Paul was propelled first into coming and studying whales in the wild. He did work at the Vancouver Aquarium in Vancouver, and realized fairly quickly that this was just an inappropriate activity for the orcas and for people as well.
Yes, absolutely. One of the realities, I think, about captive displays is that they really don't show you what the life of the whale is, or even that much about what the whale is. It's a form of entertainment, and a marine circus, I guess, is a reasonable description of most of these facilities, and I think that it's a form of entertainment that attracts people. People many times like showy shows and circuses, but circuses themselves are on the way out, and I think that the marine circuses that places like SeaWorld have been making money on, and I guess that's the root cause of all of this, isn't it? For years and years. I think ultimately they'll disappear as people understand that what they're seeing there is not the real life of the whale, it's a sham. It's interesting that SeaWorld calls their whales shamu, and what they present is not the substance of the whale, it's just the form of the whale. And I do believe as people come to understand more about the whales, that they will understand and recognize that, and ultimately it will be stopped.
And I think that's what we're hoping to achieve with our partnership with Explore, is to expose people to the realities of what an orca and humpback lives are. Sometimes the views will be close, and sometimes they will be distant, but that is the reality of what's going on. The whales are moving around this area. We're covering about 50 square kilometers of what has become core habitat for the orca, and so we're going to try to show just exactly what that is. The whales are in motion. They are moving from space to space to space. And in a captive situation, that can't happen. The whales really have to go around and around and around in a very small circle. So we hope that you'll be able to enjoy the free orcas that we're going to show you.
Exactly.
Exactly. The next question is about sonar, and it's how does sonar from ships affect the whales?
Well, I think that there have been some very conclusive studies done, and incidents happen which show that the kind of sonar that military vessels use is absolutely harmful to whales. There have been numerous strandings, for example, of beaked whales, which are deep diving whales, which are particularly affected. And when there have been military tests done in numerous places around the world, they've resulted in strandings of beaked whales. But beaked whales are not the only species that are affected. Orcas themselves are affected by military sonar. And there was a very dramatic incident a number of years ago in Washington State where a U.S. military vessel, it was called the Shoop, was doing exercises that involved their sonar. And the southern resident orcas were immediately responsive to that and moved away from the sound. So we don't know all of the impacts, but they are absolutely detrimental to the whales, and I think that you could include many different species of whales in that comment. And I think also moving on from sonar to other kinds of very loud and intense sounds that are made in the ocean. Seismic exploration, that is the exploration that is being used to look for oil deposits under the ocean floor. They're also very, very harmful to whales and have the potential for causing strandings and so forth. So sound in the ocean is a really big issue, and that's something that obviously we're concerned about here.
I think you could also speak to why sound in particular, like the structure of a whale, and in particular in the beaked whales, why literally their heads were blown up by these sounds. That they were so devastating that the inner parts of the head just could not deal with the impact of the noise. Yeah. So and you can talk about how orcas depend totally on sound.
Well, essentially all cetaceans, all whales and dolphins depend on sound. It's the basis of their sensory view of the world. How they view the world is primarily through sound. If you think about us, of course we use sound and we experience sound. It's a wonderful part of our lives, of course. But primarily we get our information about the world around us by sight, by vision. In the cetaceans and whales and dolphins, it's really the reverse of that. Most of the information they get about the world around them is through sound. And once you understand that, I think you can understand fairly clearly that sound it can be very disruptive to them in their lives in the ocean. They rely on sound to find food. They rely on sound to communicate with one another, rely on sound to navigate, and so forth. Practically every part of their lives are dependent on sound. So when you put intense sounds into the water, and I'm including things like boat noise, loud boat noise, for example, you're disrupting their normal lives. You're interfering with their ability to hunt, communicate, and navigate. And I think that this is something that we really need increasingly to pay attention to. And that's, again, part of our work here at Orca Lab. I'm trying to see if I can read the next question.
No, I can do it for you.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Just have to cough.
Sorry about that.
Well, one of the things we're hoping, if people are interested in sound, sorry, with the Explorer audience, is to introduce to you the beautiful sounds that orcas can make. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go for a sec.
Yeah.
And your next question, Paul, is since this is a heavy whale traffic area, our boat's limited on the type of fishing, caging, netting that they can do as to avoid entanglement. And I'll be right back.
Okay, I'll see if I can bring the computer a little bit closer.
Well, you can answer that question.
Yeah, but I also want to speak a little bit about sound, more about sound. I came here first in 1970, and I put a hydrophone in the water just offshore here, and started listening to the sounds that orcas make. And they're really fantastic. They're really quite beautiful. They really take your mind elsewhere, I think, in many ways. They take your breath away often to listen to them. And so over the years after that, we have developed a network of hydrophones. We have 6 hydrophones, I think, as Helena mentioned, that cover about 50 square kilometers of the surrounding area. And we listen to them 24 hours a day and around each day of the year and over the years. And they give us a very wonderful glimpse into the lives of the orcas. We're able to hear them when they arrive in the area, and from the work, ultimately it was work that came from a scientist named John Ford, who figured out that different orca pods have different dialects. And Helena's done a lot of work since then, looking at how to discriminate the dialects of different matronlines, different little family groups. So from the sounds that the whales make when they come into the area, we can figure out who's there. And then we can start tracking them from one hydrophone range to the next, and essentially follow them around in the area acoustically. And that tells us a great deal about who is there and what they're doing, who's with each other. Often when they come into the area, a lot of what they're doing is meeting one another and hanging out with one another, enjoying one another. When they have opportunities to mate, they often do so here, and so forth. And a lot of what we learn about the whales is from sound. And so we've been doing this for a very long time. And in 2000, thanks to a partnership with a Japanese company called NTT Data, we started streaming the live sounds that we listen to in our lab on the internet. And we also, again, thanks to NTT Data, started streaming live video. Well, it turned out ultimately that this was an incredibly expensive thing to do, and we couldn't continue the video part of it, but we have over the years continued the audio portion of that, and have been streaming the live audio that we listen to in our lab 24 hours a day. And this, I think, gives anybody who wants to tune into what the orcas are doing, just by going to the website orca-live.net and clicking on the audio button. With Explore, we're opening that world up again, streaming live audio, but also adding this video dimension that really expands our view of the world. But it all starts with acoustics.
Really? I think the first time I ever heard orcas on the hydrophones was a moment that I'm never going to forget, because suddenly a whole other world opens up and you understand somewhat the space and the beauty of what's going on. And the northern residents are very rich in their sounds, and it's just it's an incredible experience, actually.
It is. It's one of the most wonderful things about being here is being able to listen to orcas, and you wake up in the middle of the night and there they are.
It's the payoff for listening to a lot of boat traffic.
Yes, and I have to say that increasingly over the years we've had to put up with boat noise, and our assistants, bless them, when they come here and sit with earphones on and listen for whales 24 hours a day, have to tolerate an incredible amount of stressful boat noise. very grateful to them, I have to say.
Did you answer this one? Since this is a heavy whale traffic area, are boats limited on the type of fishing, caging, netting that they can do so to avoid entanglement?
Well, I have to say that entanglement is a risk. It's and over the years, there have been a few orcas that have been caught in fishing gear. In fact, I think it was just last year that a young orca was totally accidentally the whale, and eventually the whale was freed. But the trauma, I'm not sure. Subsequently, sadly, that whale died. And there have been other incidents over the years in which whales have gotten trapped in seine nets. And you know how seine nets work. It's a big net that encircles the fish. And sometimes when the orcas are hunting fish, they'll go into the net looking for a bite to eat. And on very rare occasions it has happened that an orca, usually a young one, gets trapped in that net. And I've even heard of an orca being, pulled up onto the deck of a fishing boat in the course of bringing the net in. I think, in general, those incidents haven't resulted in fatalities to the whales. Fishermen, at this point at least, fishermen are very, very sympathetic to the whales. They love them. They love having them around, and they're very, very interested in them. And so, fishermen are not a threat.
I think you need to also talk in this area. There are more than one species of whales. So we have orcas, but we also have humpbacks.
Yeah.
And entanglement for humpbacks is a problem.
It is.
There is a prawn fishery here in this area, and every year the humpbacks get entangled into the lines of the prawn fisher gear. And this is a very difficult problem, and sometimes the humpback can be so weighted down and actually tethered by these long lines that it has to be cut free. And fortunately on the coast there's a few specialists that come to the aid of these humpbacks when they can be found. So there's quite an alert system going on about whether or not somebody is entangled or not, and they're trying to change perhaps the way the gears is deployed and work, but so far it's still a problem. We have in this area a young group that are actually tasked with the idea of keeping watch for the humpbacks and their entanglement. That's the Marine Education Resource Society, MERS.
Research.
Did I say, what did I say?
You said resource, but that...
Resource,
okay.
research.
MERS, Marine Education Research Society. It's a great group of people who are doing wonderful work protecting whales in this area and learning about them. We routinely, for example, observe humpbacks off our lab, and we send photos to MERS in order to confirm or figure out who's actually out there. And so it's wonderful to have these colleagues. And part of what they're attempting to do is protect the whales or be on hand when there are fishing openings. And as Helena said, that there are real risks associated with nets in the water when fish are being caught and whales are present. It often seems to me that whales don't, speaking of humpbacks, that they don't pay very much attention to the fact that all this fishing is happening. And so there are very, very severe dangers associated with this activity for the whales. And so it's wonderful to have somebody on hand. And there's also the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, which has a team that they send out if entanglements occur, which have resulted in releasing several humpbacks on this coast from being entrapped in nets. Sadly, I have to say, it's not always successful, and humpbacks do drown and are lost as a result of entanglements.
The other big problem for marine life is being struck by boats. So there's quite a bit of effort going on to try to educate boaters to slow down when they're in an area where there are whales and other marine mammals. We do see ship strikes. Just this year, one of the very young orcas of the A23 matrilon, in the A5 pod, Fern, she was struck by a prop, and she or he, I'm not sure they know the sex of the young whale, but you can actually see the marks of the propeller, and they go right across the dorsal fin and right across the flank, so you can actually see the motion of the propeller. So Fern got too close to a boat, and a boat got too close to Fern, and it was a near tragedy. The whale looks okay, and the wound is healing over, but it's not the first time that this has happened.
No, quite. I forget exactly the time, but when A60 is Fern's cousin, yes?
Uncle.
Uncle. Fife. A60 is a whale that was severely injured by a boat propeller many years ago now, when he was just quite young, and for years afterwards you could see the big scars, deep scars in his body, but fortunately over the years they've completely healed, and I think it's even quite difficult, at least from a distance at this point, to see that he was injured. But these incidents, so we're lucky, you know, with Fife and with Fern, I think. But these incidents tell us about the dangers that boats present to the whales, and I think
well, wasn't it 2 years ago that there was a boater and he was just traveling in Johnson's Strait, and he didn't notice the humpback, and the humpback breached right in front of him and landed on his boat.
Or his boat hit the whale.
Or his, yeah, right.
His boat hit the whale at speed, and it did a lot of damage to the boat and caused severe injuries to the boater. So there are dangers on both sides. I guess I think more about whales than people, but there are real dangers to people out there as well as to the whales.
Moving on, there's a question about how deep are the channels here?
Well, Johnson Strait itself is actually quite deep. You can go down, I think, about 500 meters to 1,500 feet in the middle of Johnson Strait. So it's almost like a canyon, you know, which is a wonderful part of what happens acoustically, because you hear the sounds echoing through these great underwater spaces. There are much shallower places, of course, in the general area, but that's quite deep, and the whales, of course, know all of this, and they use a lot, I think, of the geography of the underwater in order to figure out what they're doing, where they're going, and how to find fish.
This is a related question in a sense. What are the tidal differences there? And do they have an effect on the orcas or the humpbacks? And the answer is yes, they do. The orcas are well tuned into what is happening to the currents and to the tides. What we see here is that they use, you either have a current that is going one direction or it'll turn and go the slack. There's this half an hour or so when the ocean becomes quiet, and very often we see the orcas come and position for that slack, that moment when the ocean and the currents have subsided, and then they'll start to make their move, and they will move into the next passage and then allow the current to take them along the same way. But a really kind of neat thing that they do is that when they want to rest, and I think Megan talked to this, that they don't actually sleep, they rest, would be a fair description of it. They get together and they sort of huddle together closer. They stop vocalizing very often, and they turn into the current, and this gives them the control to keep that group together, and so then they're not just swept away by the current. They're actually just pushing against the force gently, and they just stay there on the, very often on the surface, right?
Oh, shallow dives.
Very shallow dives, and not very much vocalization at that time, and so it's a quiet time. I think I think one of the funniest times when there was a visiting group coming in, and they went into Johnson Strait, and there were a lot of whales. There was over 50 whales in the area. And obviously the group that had come from a long distance was quite tired, and they started to lessen the amount of vocalization they did, and they gave off this one call, and eventually all the other whales that had been quite excited to see them slowly subsided down in their calls, and everybody started to huddle together, and then they all started resting in what we call a resting line. And sometimes these resting lines, depending on the number of whales there are, can stretch from one side of Johnson Strait to the other. But it was a lovely moment because, you know, it was like, oh, I need my rest now.
Yes. But it is very, very clear that they're totally aware of the tides, they're totally aware of the currents. And we actually hope at times that will influence their behavior and bring them right in front of the lab. When there's a lot of current around here, and when the tide is ebbing for going out, for example, it's moving at 4 or 5 knots, which is, you know, quite fast in terms of just a mass of water that's heading in one direction. And what we sometimes when the whales are in Blackfish Sound, it's just around the corner from us here, and we are listening to them and seeing that they're heading our way, and hoping that they'll come close to us. We're thinking about the currents. We're thinking about the fact that that big ebbing tide is hitting the wall, the rock wall that's adjacent to us here near Burnt Point, and causing a back eddy that is going in the opposite direction right in front of us. And it often happens that when whales are coming our way down Blackfish Sound, heading against an ebbing tide, that they will in fact come very close to the lab, which is for us, of course, is incredibly exciting, and something that we can bring to everybody via the camera that we have on our lab that is available on the Explore side. Anyway, tides are a lot of fun, often.
A lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Fun for us, fun for the whales.
Well, it's their world, so it's what they're dealing with. And, you know, it's the same for kayakers. And if anybody out there is a kayaker, they certainly understand what happens when they're working against a tide. My 4th and 5th grade class is currently tuning into your chat. One of them would like to know, how do orcas sleep? And I think we just answered that they do need rest, and very often these resting lines that we just described happen in the hot afternoons. So we'll be busy tracking the whales through the area sort of day and night, and then in the afternoon, very often during especially if it's sunny, it seems that's the time that they take their rest.
I suspect they do it at night too.
Well, they do, but they do all sorts of things. But very often they're resting. I think anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess the short answer is they don't go to sleep like we do. They don't go out for 6-8 hours or however long. So they're, in a sense, they're always awake. And I believe the idea is that they rest one part of their brain and the other stays awake. And when we see them here, often what they're doing is making very shallow dives. They rest as a group, and they make very shallow dives with relatively short breaths between, 20, 30 seconds, something like that. And they do this for a while, for maybe half a dozen times, and then they go down again as a group into also, I think, a fairly shallow dive that might last 3 minutes, something rather like that. They do this for a while. It can be just for a relatively short time, or it could be for a very extended time. Rest is obviously important to them, but for us, I think one of the things that's really interesting about it is that they rest as a group.
And that's also interesting. When it's time to stop resting, you'll start to hear maybe one or two individuals starting to really wake up, and they start calling, but they'll just use maybe one or two types of calls, and it'll get repeated until eventually, and it starts to build. So you sort of hear this back and forth a little bit, and then you're aware that everybody's awake, and then they all start moving, and they all start chatting to each other again.
It's often the start to just something like, nah. That'll be the sign to wake up.
Right. They have calls that are associated with this behavior, and we'll hear those, and it'll be time to wake up and move on. Oh. So how many volunteers work for Orca Lab?
Each year we have about half a dozen, maybe 8 people who are working in our lab, coming here to assist our work. In previous times we had many more than that, but about 6 or 8 people are very helpful to us.
One of the reasons we need at least a steady number of volunteers through the peak of the summer, which is July, August, and into September, is that we're working both day and night, because, as Paul said, whales are on the move, and they do things throughout the whole day. So very often we will be listening to whales foraging or traveling or socializing, and it can be at night. So some of our shifts go well into the early morning hours.
Mm. And actually, I think one of the, despite the boat noise, one of the wonderful things about being on shift at night is that you get to hear these wonderful calls of the whales in the absence of boat noise. Because often when we have hydrophones in places that are great fishing spots for the sports fishers, for example, and they are out at the crack of dawn, even before daylight sometimes. So we have this boat noise happening on hydrophones that is, I have to say, annoying in the very early hours of the morning. But before that, when it's absolutely dark and there's nothing happening out there, what the whales are doing acoustically is quite wonderful. And these are very, I think, special moments for everybody who happens to have the opportunity of hearing them in the lab.
And really, you're not reliant on anything visual, so you're just listening. Yeah. And I think that's what intensifies the experience quite often.
Kind of get transported into an acoustic work.
Mm. What are the objectives of your organization? Do you receive funding from the Canadian government to assist you in your research?
I think the simplest answer really is that what we are interested in is learning about the lives of orcas, and I think we can extend that into the lives of other species, but we're particularly interested in the lives of orcas, and within the species orca, we're probably most interested in the lives of resident orcas, because I think partly because we grew up with them, and we've been following their lives, and we know the individuals, in many cases, really quite well. And so we're able, and it's really a privilege, I think, to be able to follow the lives of these whales. And the add-on to that is that though we're deeply interested in the lives of the orcas, the whales, we want to find out about them in ways that don't involve disturbing them. And that's what we've been doing for many, many years now, is trying to develop methods that for listening, and now, thanks to Explore, for seeing the whales without disturbing them with their lives at all. As for government funding, we don't receive government funding. We're entirely dependent on the goodwill of individuals and organizations who like what we do. Though I have to say, many, many years ago, I think it was in the early 1980s, we had a kayaker come by here who looked at what we were doing and talked to us about how we did it, and realized that we were carrying batteries up and down cliffs quite often to power the hydrophone stations that we have. And she turned out to be an employee of Canada's Energy, Mines and Resources Department in Ottawa. And she said, well, what you should do is apply for a grant to put solar panels up on these remote sites. And that the ENR was just starting to fund experimental projects in this line. So we ended up with a grant, I think it was $50,000, which enabled us to put our remote hydrophone stations together and power them with solar panels. And that was a huge relief to me personally, who've been accustomed for years to carrying batteries up and down cliffs. But that I think is the only government money we've had over these years. We're very, very fortunate in having the support of organizations like the Whale and Dolphin Conservation, like Whale and Dolphin Conservation in England, where we have an adoption program that people can sign up to that brings us a very significant part of our annual income. And with the Born Free Foundation, also in England, who has an adoption program of Springer, this wonderful story about this little orphan orca who was rescued. And that helps us out a lot too. And there are other organizations, I have to say, like Greenpeace in Germany, and there's a list of organizations who like what we do, who give us money that keeps us going. But right now, I have to say, we're immensely grateful to Explore for the support they're giving us in launching this live camera project, which to me is the most exciting thing that we're doing currently.
You ready for the next one?
Okay.
Okay. This is one that will give you pause to think about. What discovery since you began studying orcas has been the most surprising? That probably goes back to early days.
Well, I think for me personally, I said when I first came here, I put a hydrophone in the water and I started listening to these incredible sounds that the whales are making. And we also started on a day-by-day basis, really, to see that we could recognize individuals. And we started giving them names like Nicola, for example, was this gorgeous female with this dorsal fin that had a little, quite a big notch out of the top of it. So it was natural to name her Nicola. So we started learning about the whales, but on the acoustic side, it was incredible to realize that there were all kinds of different sounds that were being made. That some of the groups that we were seeing had sounds that were totally different from the sounds that other groups are making. I thought these were different conversations. So years later, when John Ford came along and started doing his acoustic studies and showed that the different pods actually had different dialects, I think this was a huge surprise to me. What Helen has done in terms of figuring out what the matronines are doing and how they sound, and the fact that they use dialects, and the fact that the dialects are passed on from generation to generation to generation through the mums, through the matriarchs. I think these are, for me, these are incredibly special points of understanding. And then you get down to things like the rubbing beaches, for example, which shows the whales coming in and they dive and they blow out bubbles. So you see these great circles of bubbles in the water. And what they're doing is they're releasing air from their lungs, which reduces their body buoyancy, which enables them to sink to the bottom and just skim across the pebbles. Things like this, I think, are really exciting to understand, to realize.
For me, I've been involved in this now for over 30 years, and I think it's still happening. I think the discovery, that's the exciting thing, is that the discovery is still happening, and the complexity of their societies is still being revealed every day that we observe and listen to these whales. And for me, that is, it keeps, I don't know, it keeps it fresh and it keeps it happening. And because we don't have answers for a lot of things. So for the young students that are out there, that's your challenge. There will be things still to discover. And I'm just happy that we get a chance to do this.
We are, I have to say, very privileged to have this life here and to be able to do this work and to live in such a gorgeous environment. It really is a wonderful thing, wonderful way for me personally to have been able to spend my life and share it with Helen.
Oh, you're so sweet.
It's true, it's absolutely true.
What is the gestation period for an orca, and do they ever give birth to more than one cow?
Well, the gestation period is about 17 months. And I think there may be very rare occasions in which a female gives birth to twins. I think it's very, very rare. And I'm not even certain it does happen at all, because there was years ago, they were thought to be twins.
Right.
Who turned out actually to be babies that were born at almost the same time. One whose mum died and joined the other mum's baby. So they were seen as twins. But so I'm not 100% sure that twins.
I don't think in the northern residence that there's ever been twins born, or so it's usually a single baby, and the mums have, I think, babies maybe every 3 to 5 years, sort of in between calves. They take a lot of time nurturing and bringing along the babies, and so it's actually doesn't happen very quickly. So if you add in 17 months plus the time that they take to nurse, which is usually just a little over a year, and then they're really nurturing the baby along for another year before I think the female will get pregnant again.
Oh, I'd say it's at least 2 years, probably more like 3, 4, 5 years between pregnancies.
They're except for the length of the gestation period, their life history actually mirrors human history fairly well. They reach sexual maturity about the same time we do, 12, 13 years of age, and then the females will start to have a baby on average at about 15 years of age, and the young males will do what young teenage boys do. They grow rapidly and then become mature. So yeah, their lives, and they live at relatively the same length of time as we do.
Yeah, I'd say if you think about human lifespans before modern medicine, this is probably relatively similar to the lifespans of orcas. You have very big differences, I have to say, between human lives and orca lives, in the sense that male orcas live considerably shorter lives than females. The work that's been done over the years indicates that males live on average about 30 years. This is in the resident communities on this coast, and that females live on average about 50 years. And given that that is an average, you have to think about what the range is. And it turns out that some females in the southern resident community have lived very, very long lives. There's a female who's thought to be perhaps 100 years old, although it may be a little less than that. But that's a very, very long life. In the northern resident community, I think the oldest female, we were just talking to Jared at Towers about this yesterday.
About 80?
The oldest female isn't it 73?
No.
This is W3?
W3, but she's estimated to be born in 1935. It's an estimation.
I see, so that would be 80 years old. So lifespans of female orcas are certainly longer than males. A male orca might, in this resident situation, might live for 50 years, but the average lifespan is considerably less than that. But in general, it's very interesting to see that many aspects of the biology and the lifespan and so forth actually are quite similar to humans. And females, I should add to that, stop giving birth at about 40 years of age, although they can extend that. It's, again, similar to humans.
Right, they have menopause, which is actually unusual.
Yeah. And after that, they have long lives also, in which they participate fully in what's happening in their community and in their families. Love it, actually.
We've seen the sea lions interact with humpbacks during what appears to be a feed. Do they do the same with the orcas?
Sometimes.
Why are you laughing? We laugh because the Antics of Sea Lions are curious to say the least. I mean, they're an interesting group, and we have very close to here a haul out where sometimes we get over 200 sea lions. These are stellar sea lions that are hauled out onto the rocks during the fall and winter and early spring. And so we get to listen to them growling, and they're quite a gang and are very interesting to watch. And yes, they do go near to the humpbacks when they're feeding.
Yeah, and they also at times do similar things with the orcas. Also, the Pacific white-sided dolphins often seem to be interested in playing not just. I call it playing. I imagine it's something like that. Playing not just with humpbacks, but also with orcas at times. I'm not sure how to interpret this from the orca's point of view. And
well, for the humpbacks, it's kind of interesting because we just had a humpback that came in close to the lab the other night. It was just in the evening, and there were sea lions all around this humpback, and the humpback was making sounds and sloshing his tail and slapping his pecs, and the sea lions were just rolling over on top of the humpback. And you think that doesn't look that comfortable for the humpback, but at the same time it happens a lot, and so I'm not sure if anybody really understands what's going on.
I don't either. It's hard to. It looks like play. It looks like at times it looks like extreme play that you might call harassment. It's not entirely clear what the reaction of the whales is to this kind of behavior, but we have seen some amusing things over the years.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to talk about the A36s off Blackney Pass with the Dawes porpoises.
Well, yeah, but just before you get into that one, just carrying on with the humpbacks, because you see it most often with the humpbacks. Yeah. And the other day we were filming in Blackney a group of big whales, the transient whales, and they were after a sea lion. and they began the chase across from us and carried on, headed towards Hansen Island, and a humpback came and positioned itself between the bigs and the sea lion, and the bigs never got that sea lion. The sea lion was able to clear out of the way of the humpback. And later, these were very determined bigs whales. They were very determined to get something, and they followed this sea lion into a group of sea lions who all got into the water. And we think it's a strategy that if there's so many of them in the water together and they huddle together, that flailing around and raising their heads up, looking at what's going on, and agitating the water. I think the bigs are deterred by this, and they don't really want to tackle a bunch of sea lions that are hefty animals themselves, and
with ferocious teeth.
With ferocious teeth, yes. And so they usually back off at that point. But it was very interesting that the humpback, who at times looks annoyed by the sea lions, actually looked like it was interceding between it and the bigs. So I think that's where the confusion is. We don't exactly know what is going on. What is the relationship here? So we're going to continue to look and see if we can figure it out.
Sometimes it looks like the humpbacks are big bros to the sea lions.
Can you expand a bit more about Orca language and how they use it? It's a big topic, but as Paul said, orcas have dialects. Dr. Ford determined this in the early 1980s, and from there, that insight into the fact that these whales were using different dialects, sometimes sharing the same type of call, that indicated how closely related they are, really gave an illustration into some of the complexity of what's going on. But can speak mostly towards the northern resident community, who are very chatty. It's a feature of them. They like to vocalize, and they're quite loud sometimes and quite intense in their vocalizations at times. They actually own about a dozen or so different call types, which they will repeat in different combinations with each other, and that is what we listen to over the hydrophones. So it's not a lot of variety, and we don't understand exactly what is inside each call type in terms of communication, but the sense is that communication is happening. At a very basic level, it is an indicator of which group each individual belongs to, because they inherit the call traditions from their mothers, and they stay in that group, in their mother's group, all their entire lives. Brothers, sisters, cousins stay within that group. So
yeah, I think you can say that at the very least, the calls enable other whales to know who's there and where they are. And beyond that, I think we're only guessing. I personally think there's significant information in the calls that are made, but that's at this point a matter of speculation.
I like the next one. There's a seagull that stops by the camera regularly. Will you introduce us to her?
Absolutely.
This is Uni, and I think Megan talked a little bit about Uni too. Uni has been around for at least probably 20 years, and she returns each August to this bay that Orca Lab is placed on, and we can distinguish her from the other glaucous gulls that drop by, although she discourages other glaucous gulls from hanging out too closely. She did once accept another glaucous gull cross, actually. I think it was with a California seagull, but we called that one Toonie. But uni is urchin, is the Japanese word for urchin, and this is what we named her because of her habits of swimming along the kelp forest on the surface, on the kelp fronds that are lying on the surface, and she looks down into the water and then dives down and brings up...
ducks her head down.
She ducks her head down, sorry, yeah, and brings up a green urchin and then takes that to the rocks and eats it. And she does this repeatedly all day long.
the other seagulls stand around watching her, trying to figure out what it is that she's doing. They can't figure it out. And they sometimes get a few of her scraps, but anyway, she is unique, the world's greatest seagull. Unique.
Yeah, we wait for her return, and then in May she disappears for a few months and then comes back in August. So.
And she's been doing this for at least 17 years.
Right. Her arrival is an event. It gets put in the logbook.
Yeah.
For sure. We're up to number 18, and we'd love to have Orca Lab available to answer questions on the chat board about what we are seeing on the camera. Is that possible?
Yes, and excuse us for not being more more engaged in this process, but we do understand that you ask questions while you're watching, and we will. From time to time, we can't promise to do it continually, but we will from time to time attempt to ask some questions on the chat line of the site.
It's been a real pleasure to be able to talk to you, and as we said in the beginning, we're very excited about this new endeavor, and we hope that everybody will enjoy what they get to see and listen to.
Yes, thanks for being here. Thanks for watching Explore, and thanks for your interest in orcas and in what we're attempting to do with them. See you again before long, I hope.
Thank you.
Thanks.